whatsoever.
Me either.
Can anyone else explain to me why it matters at all?
I got married on Lag BaOmer.
That's great.
So that's my emotional connection to it. It's my wedding anniversary.
Mm.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Yeah, mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to explain Lag BaOmer to me?
Hod Shebahod.
Hod Shebahod, exactly. But before that, I don't know. I always, for some reason, had this thing in my mind that I wanted to be married on Lag BaOmer. There was something really, I don't know, the tipping point somehow on the way from Pesach to Shavuot.
Yeah, well, first of all, I know about the story about the plague with Rabbi Akiva's students, which I always thought was even a stand-in for the real story. It was really about the rebellion against Rome, not a plague. But now that we're having a plague, I kind of resonate more with the plague story. And I'm laughing, but seriously. But I also read, and I think there's got to be a lot of, as Reb Zalman would say, pre-patriarchal origins to this, because this kind of bonfire ceremonies are known. I also read about this elsewhere. Bonfires, May Day. There's Beltane, which is a bonfire festival between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, midway between. So it seemed like there was some other, bonfires, there's not really good explanation for that. And the whole, it's the Yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, purportedly. So anyway, I think it's one of those things that goes way back and goes back to according to Strassfield, right? And Siegel, it was the harvest, the tension of the harvest season. Don't cut your hair while you're trying to grow your crops in the spring, and all kinds of other things that predate any kind of historical association to it. But that's a really hard to put in a soundbite, to people. And anyway.
So there's another piece that if we are harvesting wheat, or if we're harvesting barley, and if we burnt all our bread before Pesach, we ate our matzah during Pesach, then we have no bread except what we grind from the barley that we begin to harvest at Pesach. And now we've been eating barley for a month. And that's hard work. And we're kind of halfway through. Maybe we're also beginning to harvest the wheat, beginning to eat freaky and other half ripe wheat products. So things are easing up again.
I definitely have the feeling that we're at that point where Shavuot is inevitable. Because it was inevitable 1,000 years ago. This Shavuot was also inevitable, but somehow it feels like there's no stopping it now. But that's not a good feeling for me. That's a panicked feeling, slightly panicked. It's like, how in the world?
How am I going to stay up all night?
No, that's too easy for me, unfortunately. More like, how in the world could I possibly be ready for revelation if it were even ever to happen? There's not enough time.
Well, but you have to be ready, because if you're not ready, then how can we who know must be ready?
Yeah. I suppose there's no real getting ready for that, though, if it actually were to happen. Nothing.
Well, when do we ever determine the time of revelation? Isn't that Hashem's call?
At least it would appear that way, right?
Although it's whether our ears are open or not.
On the other hand, don't you think it's suspicious that Hashem's decision to reveal the Torah happens to just coincide with the wheat harvest and all that? It's kind of convenient, right?
Well, they weren't harvesting out at Mount Sinai, or they hadn't been harvesting for a while by then.
What was that, Deborah?
They weren't harvesting at Mount Sinai, right? I
No.
mean, and hadn't been doing any harvesting for a while by then.
Right. Then the
But-
question: when are we living in stories or history, and who knows?
Yeah, what's
The
it?
the
Go ahead.
overlay of the historical events of the Exodus onto the seasonal holiday calendar has always seemed to me to be a fairly late innovation.
Mhm.
Although in the book of Jubilees, Shavuot is connected with Noah.
Hmm.
And every
Yeah.
holiday is like connected to the ancestral period.
So this relates to something we're about to discuss today, as it turns out, which is, let's see if I can find it in the book, actually. Yeah. The question is, in chapter 3, I mean, we want to finish chapter 5 also, but for chapter 3, to what degree does the overlay of kind of rabbinic or rational or historical religion erase the nature connection or make us forget the nature connection, and to what degree does it enhance? Because we have lived in a reality until fairly recently where it was like a big deal to talk about the agricultural aspects of the holidays, and in fact the historical was really the only thing that was considered important. And just to look at this, there's a quote on page 113 from Yitz Greenberg. Just footnote, I mean, I love Yitz Greenberg, and he does beautiful work, and he in his printed work, he has some huge blind spots related to what we're talking about. But you all don't know this, but he's working on a book which is actually focused on a more biocentric ethics. But I've been begging him to get it done already, but he's still working on it as far as I know. But here is the quote on footnote. What footnote is that? Hang on, I gotta increase the size here a little bit. Page footnote 363, which is on page 113. You don't need to turn to it. I'll just read it. He talks about the major characteristic of the Jewish religion is the shift from nature to history. And by shift, it means replacement of nature by history. So what he says about Sukkot, which is equally applicable to any of the other holidays, which I find interesting, the holiday of Sukkot focuses equally on the importance of nature as on history as no other Jewish holiday does. And he says this contradiction underscores the divine genius of the Torah. It expresses the deepest values when it transforms a nature festival into an historical holiday. This represents the movement from human passivity and acceptance of nature as destiny to a drive for liberation. So there's a whole crazy bunch of dichotomies and dualisms that are alive in this one quote. And just the very fact that he terms it a contradiction to have nature and history be in the same holiday, just it sort of encapsulates the problem that we're dealing with when we're trying to create a more ecocentric Judaism. That makes sense to everyone?
That reminds me of the resin for dummies. You know, it's not very hard, and people have to get smarter so they can work in computers. The smarter people do.
We couldn't hear all the things you said because of lagging and strange distortions. If you want to repeat what you said, turn off your video for a second so we can get a good signal. Not hearing you, Rita.
Okay, I just turned video off. Our president once made a comment how being a farmer is really a very easy job, you know, and you don't have to be very smart to do that. But kind of now people are getting to be smarter so they can do computer technology. People remember that?
No, how can I keep track of all the stupid things that man says? It would be such a waste of my brain space. But yes, that's pretty stupid. Anyway, hi everyone.
Squeaking. Hello.
Let's imagine that there are smart people, responsible, moral, and ethical people who are trying to guide things in this world.
That would be so nice.
Yes, we're just going to imagine that for this 1 hour. We're going to imagine that could be the case.
Well, I think there are some people like that in some places. So, but I don't want to argue about it. But they're not every.
Well,
Yeah.
I live in one of those places, so
Me too. I live in a state like that. I'll just say so.
I live in a country like that, so I'm pretty happy.
You know what? Let's posit that there's a lot of people like that, and that there's a few of the stupid ones who are dominating our minds these days.
Indeed. So, do you want to focus on chapter 3 right now, or do you want to do the end of chapter 5? Which do you want to do first? Any preference? Yes, no, maybe so.
I like.
Since we're already started, what's that?
I like 5, but
Well, we're going to do both, God
Yeah.
willing. God willing. Since we already started talking about 3, let's continue with 3 for a little while, and then we'll go back to 5. So first of all, any questions about 3 that people want to ask, or passages you want to ask about? Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
As I was reading the second paragraph of chapter 3, I think I didn't get like the essence of what you were saying in the paragraph. So I don't need like the full unpacking of the whole paragraph, but just like what the key is there.
he's hungry.
You mean where it says the idea of seldom indicates the significance of human life is rooted in?
Yeah, like I got that you were trying to compare two things, but I didn't quite understand the distinction between them.
Let's get this on screen so we can be talking about this together more easily, if I can. There we go. Sharing that. Are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm not exactly sure I understand the questions, but I'm just going to go for it and see what we got here. The way we talk about human life and infinite value, the infinite value of human life, the irreplaceability of human life, all these ways we have of talking about human life are incredibly powerful and important for us in terms of human rights, that kind of thing. At the same time, if something has infinite value, it trumps all other values, right? So that nothing can be valuable in comparison to infinite value. So nothing can be valuable beyond the human world comparison to a human life. And, you know, on the face of it, it's an absurdity to say that because, of course, without a planet, there is no human life anyway. So there's already a problem thinking that way. But if we think that way, the question is, how does that distort our ethical choices to talk about infinite value? And I think what I've looked at is what other formulations different than infinite value would help us create a scaffold for human rights without destroying the idea of the value of the more than human world or undermining it so radically. So that's the question in this chapter. So the first point is to become aware of the ways in which our assumptions do undermine having a fuller experience and perception and apprehension of the more than human world and our place in it. So how do we become aware of those assumptions, aware of those prejudices? And then once we become aware of them, how do we shift them? Because it's not a simple thing to figure out how to shift away from this infinite value formulation of the image of God while still maintaining a strong sense of human rights and human dignity. So that's the question. If we're not worried about that, it's very easy. And that's what a kind of simplistic deep ecology perspective might push. Does everyone know what I mean when I say deep ecology, or should I explain what that is?
Explain it. Can you explain it?
I can. And does anyone else want to add some words about it? I'll say a few words and then see if anyone else wants to add to it, okay? So shallow ecology, according to people who do talk about deep ecology, shallow ecology would be the ecology that says we have to do X, Y, Z because that's good for the planet because people need it in order to survive. So there's no critique of the human self-perception or awareness in that way of looking at things. Shallow ecology goes right along with the assumption that humans are the most important species and that everything that is on the planet needs to serve our ends.
Okay.
And deep ecology says, no, we have to question the fundamental assumptions, the fundamental assumption that human species is somehow in any way more important than any other species. And it tends towards people looking in the direction of saying humans are kind of like a cancer or a virus on the planet. It's not the only way to look at it. But when you look at it that way, it's probably not the best thing for the way humans should think about themselves. You know, that is, I don't think that humans that think of themselves as viruses or cancers are going to make the choices that will enliven and enrich the earth in the way that we need to be able to do. So there's a strong reason to critique deep ecology. On the other hand, objectively, from an ecological, strictly scientific ecological perspective, there's no reason to say that human species are more important than any other species. And certainly ecologically, we're not more important. Or we're more important to the extent that we do so much destruction, but what we add is not actually anything especially significant in the positive sense. So that's deep ecology. And the Torah has a deep ecology perspective in some parts as well. Does anyone want to take a stab at what I mean by that? Anyone?
Yeah.
Where do we find deep ecology in the Torah?
I mean, when we're told we'll be vomited from the earth if we don't obey God. I mean, when is that the way that should all be understood? That, I mean, that's just so interesting that, the punishment, and it very much is in language of reward and punishment, but the punishment for disobeying is going to be to have the earth devastated, and we will suffer greatly. We'll be hungry. There won't be crops, and so on.
Yeah, and let's share with you something else, since I happen to have it on my screen. One of the things I did today already was I gave a lecture at a conference in Norway, actually, which was supposed to actually happen in Norway, but of course it happened on Zoom.
Is that Norway behind you?
No. And here's some slides from that. Let's see if I can get this right. Okay. Yeah, so this is from the Parsha this coming week, the Chukotai. Right? If you walk in my statutes, then you have all these things that are evidence of what we would call sustainability, right? Rains in their seasons, produce, tree fruit, you will dwell securely in the land. I will set peace in the land, uphold my covenant. I will let myself walk in the midst of you, and I will become God for you, and you will become my people. If you will not listen, right, I will set my face against you. And the ultimate thing, I will desolate the land, and the land will enjoy her Sabbaths. All the days of her desolation, she will rest what she didn't rest in your Sabbaths when you were dwelling on her. So without us giving the land the Sabbath, we don't have the right to be on the land, and God will wipe us out. And the description of that wiping out is quite dramatic. So I'm just going to go through. This is also in a footnote in the book, but it's easier for me to show you using this slide than to try to navigate to the place in the book. 6 curses for not observing the sabbatical year are specifically curses that describe the unraveling of the relationship between people and the land, right? So you will sow your seed for emptiness, for your enemies will eat it. That's the first. Second, you will completely use your strength for emptiness, and your land will not give her produce, and the tree of the fruit will not give his fruit. So in the first one, the fertility of the land is still preserved, but you don't get to enjoy it. And the second, the fertility of the land itself is diminished or eliminated. Third, I will send out against you the animal of the field, and she will make you childless and cut off your animals and diminish you. So you didn't share your land with the animals, so they're going to eat you instead. You will be gathered into your cities, and I will break the staff of your bread against you. You will eat and will not be satisfied. You will eat the flesh of your sons, and your daughter's flesh you will eat. You will be lost in the nations and in the land, and the land of your enemies will eat you. Got that? So the ultimate curse is that the land where you're exiled to is going to eat you instead of you eating from the land. In all of these, this is basically a deep ecology way of looking at the covenant. I'm going to stop the share there. Any response to that? If someone wants to make one? No, keep going. So question is, how do we get into this ideological pickle, one could say, where we can only see ourselves and everything else is just a mirror of us, or it doesn't exist? The way we treat the world, I mean. Right? How did we get there?
How did we get there, or how do we get out of it?
How did we get there, and how do we get out of it? The radically anthropocentric perspectives on Judaism have existed since Saadia Gaon, right? But they've always been in balance with other perspectives. It's only fairly recent.
Not before?
I don't see anything that's radically anthropocentric the way Saadia Gaon is before him. No, I don't think so. Do you have an example? I mean, Philo would be, but he's not part of the...
Sefer Toldot Adam?
Why does it mean that?
Well, if the text of the Torah is the most important book, then saying Zet Sefer Toldot Adam is the Klal Gadol b'Torah is saying that the other animals are not the important part. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's retrojection. I haven't thought it through enough.
I think it's retrojection. But Gil, what did you want to say?
It seems to me that the notion that we would be anything but anthropocentric is pretty advanced.
Gil?
Well, with that, I'm puzzled at the notion that the radical anthropocentrism shows up with Saadia Gaon and not before. So what was it about him, or the times that he was writing in, or the circumstances that he was writing in, that idea emerges then in 800, and that it takes root and becomes dominant? What's going on?
Well, first of all, I mean, of course, Simcha is right that there are plenty of anthropocentric ideas in rabbinic Judaism before that. But there's a level of radical anthropocentrism where Saadia Gaon says you shouldn't be perplexed about the purpose of creation because the purpose is humanity. Mm-hmm. And where he says that the reason why, just these things all kind of mesh together. The reason why humans don't eat animals in the Garden of Eden is not because they were supposed to not eat animals. It's just that they needed to reproduce more so that if they ate them, they wouldn't cause the extinction of the species. But the intention from the beginning, according to Saadia Gaon, is that humans would eat animals as soon as there were enough to eat them. As opposed to what the Torah seems to be clearly saying, which is no, somehow that's a kind of a curse or a diminishment of humanity when we begin to eat animals, in the story after the flood. So that's an example. Or his crazy extrapolations of all the things that we're supposed to do, what dominion gives us the right to do. So let's see if we could find that in the book.
I had a comment about Yitzhak Greenberg, so should I bring that up now or wait?
Why don't you wait a second?
Okay.
Okay, here. I can share this. Hang on a second. I'm having fun using my share feature today. Hopefully that's a reasonable thing to be doing. Okay, y'all see that? This is one of those footnotes. And which chapter are we even in here, actually? I'm not sure. Hang on a second. So we're looking at, chapter 2, footnote 300. So this is also Saadia Gaon's interpretation of what it means to have dominion. Right? They will dominate includes the entire range of devices with which man rules over the animals, with fetters and bridles, with ropes, and this is a highly abridged version of this comment, right? With weapons of the hunt, with cages, And over the fish includes stratagems for catching them, their consumption, the extraction of pearls, the use of skin and bones. And Hayam of the sea includes the subjugation of water. For humans find it within the ground and raise it out and dam rivers and power mills. And it hints at construction of ships and boats. And over the birds corresponds to snares and taming and preparation of them for food and potions. And of the sky includes, this is very interesting, the ability of humanity to understand the heavenly sphere and its composition, and to prepare instruments for measuring the hours, which he understands as a form of domination and dominion over the heavens, which is such a bizarre way of looking at it. And with the word behema, over the cattle, he gave him authority to lead, make use of, eat flesh, heal from that which is medicine, from that which is medicinal, ride on those suited for riding, know their diets, how to feed them. Over all the earth, hints at building houses, fortresses, plowing land, sowing diverse seeds, extracting gold, silver, iron, copper, fashioning utensils and jewels. You could put oil companies in here as well, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, and over creeping things includes honeybees, which is kind of humorous and to me. I mean, it's just such an extensive catalog of all the ways that we have, and to see all of them not as ways of understanding but as ways of dominating is so fascinating to me. So what happened, you have the fullest, you have with Saadia Gaon the full integration of Greek philosophy and Judaism, Jewish thought is what's going on, and it hasn't happened up till then. So there, of course, Hellenism has totally shaped rabbinic Judaism in so many ways, but it's not entirely, there's some gaps, there's some important gaps between what the rabbis thought and what Hellenism was teaching that remained in place. And those kind of gaps, those kind of break down, starting with Saadia Gaon. But it doesn't take long, right? You know, just a few, 2 centuries or so after that is Rambam, who rejects the anthropocentrism of Saadia Gaon and rejects the anthropocentrism of rabbinic Judaism in general, just rejects it. What was interesting though, and this gets to Gil's question, is that Saadia Gaon's anthropocentrism takes root and remains a constant up until the present day. Rambam, Maimonides, who is so important and so in every single other way, his stance, his radical stance against anthropocentrism is basically ignored. He says it, it's absolutely central to his guide for the perplexed, and then it's not heard from again, pretty much. So the question is not, how did Saadia Gaon come to say what he said, but what Gil was saying, how does it that takes root and not the opposite perspective? What Simcha was saying though, about the Zez Sefer Toldot Adam, so the reference there is to some text that we looked at a different week, briefly. So there's a debate, which is the greater principle in the Torah? Is it love your neighbor as yourself? Or is it, this is the book of the generations of humanity, right? And the debate there isn't about our relationship to the more than human world, per se. It's about the relationship between human beings. And so the statement that you should love your neighbor as yourself isn't adequate to create a moral foundation. It's not as great a principle because not everyone is your neighbor, and not everyone, some people are your enemies, some people are your strangers. So loving your neighbor as yourself is not going to give you a kind of universal human perspective. But Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the book of the generations of humans, according to the way Ben Azai interprets it, is the foundation for thinking that all humans are equal in some ways. So it's not really about the more than human world, it's about how do Jews view everyone else, is what he's talking about.
Yeah, except that the argument was, what is the Klal Gadol b'Torah? And not what is the, I mean, it's the thing that popped into my mind immediately when you asked the question.
Yeah, but it's not what is the, I mean, Rabbi Akiva says this is a Klal Gadol in the Torah.
But in the version you brought, Ben Azai's statement comes first. Even though we commonly discuss the one from Leviticus Rabbah where Rabbi Akiva's statement comes first.
Yes, but either way, it doesn't mean that the other one is not a klal gadol, and it doesn't mean there are no other klal gadol.
Okay.
Klalim gadolim.
Yeah.
It just
Okay.
means that this is a klal gadol. Yes.
So I'll go to Yitzhak Greenberg now, because when I read these, what you're quoting here from Yitzhak Greenberg about the infinite value of human beings, the way I understood it and heard it from him and learned it from him is that it's in reaction to the devaluation of human life, especially in the Holocaust and in the world. He didn't see it only as something Jewish in the Holocaust, but the devaluation of children around the world. How people are disrespected and so he was standing up for human rights. I think that the whole environmental larger picture he just wasn't there yet. He wasn't thinking of that. He was thinking about humanity and the way that we've devalued people, and this is the most important thing to him. So now you're saying he's writing another book, so he's trying to take a bigger step, because that's another one of his ideas I've noticed, is that he talks about the expansiveness of rabbinic tradition, the expansion of democratization, the welcoming in of more voices. So maybe even in himself, he's now seeing a bigger picture. But I don't think his idea of the infinite worth of a human being has to be like in contrast to the worth of the whole ecosystem. But right, it's in itself.
No, of course not. Of course not. But I started off saying that also, Julie. But if you use the term infinite, you are boxing yourself in, unless you're just meaning it in a kind of loose way, right? But if you say infinite, there's nothing else comparable to infinite. And there's a reason for that, exactly what you're saying. And that's of course discussed in the book too, which is that the reason why we've gone so wholeheartedly over to that perspective is not just because Judaism's anthropocentric, is because it's a response to the Shoah and the fact that human life was so incredibly devalued and how easy that is to happen.
And we are seeing this now as people look at, well, what's the value of a life as we reopen the economy? How much is it going to cost to save lives? And that's one thing I noticed with my governor, Andrew Cuomo, that he says we can't put a value on it. We can't say there's a conflict, even if we're losing money. We can't say, someone's life is worth less. We're in a bind, but we just can't think that way. But some people have baldly stated that too, like, well, it's not worth it. But
what's
anyway,
amazing, it's amazing to hear the pro-life Christians talk about, oh, well, we can lose that many grandmas and grandpas because, the economy.
Yeah, because they're not fetuses.
Right.
What's left out in that conversation is the question of what's the economy for?
Right.
I don't hear anybody asking.
And the public dialogue might be like money and capital versus human life. But we also, to tie it back to deep ecology, we have to sit also in that place of observing the way that the planet has shifted without our constant consuming activity at the same level that it has been. Literally, the world is shaking less. Like, people who monitor seismic activity have noticed that there is less vibration because there are fewer cars and fewer planes. And in the initial phase of the lockdown in China, there was less air pollution. We have to sort of, I guess that's the heart of what we're talking about here, is what has value. And I don't know that you can place it hierarchically, but certainly as you remove as much human activity, you also feel the planet resting.
Definitely. And the other side of that, of course, is that humans need social contact. So that is also a matter of life and death. It's not just about the economy. We've had 3 suicides in my community here, actually.
Oh my God.
Young people. So there is human life on the other side too. It's not just about money, but the people who are talking about that way are just talking about money, and that's the horrible thing. And that's exactly why what Yitzhak Greenberg was talking about infinite value still matters now, but it has to be infinite value in comparison with any other economic value. Like, a human life is not worth another species' life. It's not worth saving
an entire other species.
An entire other species, right? Like, of course, a human life is certainly worth if you had to choose between saving a human life and saving a different animal's life, you would choose a human life, certainly within a Jewish framework, and I think within most frameworks.
Mhm.
But that's not the same thing as choosing the life of an entire species,
Mhm.
which is not an acceptable choice to make in that sense. For example, so the other thing about the critique is not just what's wrong and what people are saying, but what are they not noticing? So, for example, and again, of course, this is in the book on page 114 is where I go into this. The whole discourse is about how the image of God indicates the infinite value of the human life. But then they go on to quote Mishnah Sanhedrin, which says that a person is an olam maleh,
Mhm.
a full world.
Mhm.
The phrase olam maleh makes zero reference to the image of God. Absolutely none, right? It's referring to the value of creation. So a human is so valuable because a human is like a creation. And that's a big deal, because that's a huge difference to say, actually, our reference point is not the value of the image of God, which only human beings have. Now, of course, the whole book is about how actually maybe not only human beings have it, but even if you say only human beings have it, the reference point in that Mishnah and those other teachings is that the value of the human is in reference to creation itself, not in relation to the image of God. And it's grounded in the infinite value of creation. And that shifts the ground radically, even though it still gives tremendous value to human life. And what's so interesting is not so much the fact, but the fact that nobody notices the fact.
So my mind has been chewing on this in a way that made me have a little bit of trouble keeping up with the conversation. But my training in transpersonal psychology includes a huge dose of developmental psychology and also kind of developmental, I don't know, anthropology or social. Oh, my dad is calling. I'll try to finish this thought really quick. But every time you emerge from a level of consciousness or a worldview, there's this tendency to reject the one right before it. So let's say you're emerging from a completely embedded worldview where you're embedded with nature, and then you're individuating and you see yourself as separate. So you reject the one before, and it isn't until you go out of that one to the next one that you start to reintegrate what comes before it. So that we're always kind of, in moving forward, we're not able to go back and integrate the immediate one, but only the one before that. And so if you look at kind of this emergent, coming out of the Industrial Revolution, we're still not able to kind of integrate, we're still rejecting the more group and communally oriented things, and we're still kind of embedded in this individualistic sort of level. And then we have to go before, we have to wait till we emerge to the next one to be able to integrate all that.
Yes.
And okay, coming, Dad. I gotta run, go help my dad. I'll be right back.
We'll see you. I mean, that's a pretty interesting point, I think, that Deborah's making. Are we at a point where we can reintegrate the things that were lost because of our Western individualistic, human-focused, human-centered, right, radical humanism? Are we at the point where we can reintegrate what was lost because of that? I mean, the thing is that it's not like society's at one stage. It's that there are lots of different segments of society in different stages. And you have segments of society that haven't even caught up with modernity. So it's just complicated, pretty complicated. Diana, what do you want to say?
Well, basically what you said about everybody's in a different place. So for me and for us, it may not be counterculture. We're having a bigger picture and taking on this larger context. But for somebody who hasn't thought that way, and I'm imagining for someone who's taken traditional Judaism and not seen the bigger picture, it's going to seem radical to them.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But you said something last week about people who understood what was happening. It would break their heart if you really knew what was going on. That really spoke to me, because it's like we have a language amongst ourselves who understand what's going on, but we don't have a language that's adequate or that explains it to the people that don't see it. It's like we're complaining and protesting, and and the people that are looking at it are doing an either or, like it's economy or it's morality. But
Yeah. So one of the statements that's interesting to look at in the tradition is a statement that each person is required to say to themselves, the whole world was created for my sake. Kol ha'olam nivra bishvili. Yeah, there we go. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. Sorry, I said it wrong. Thank you. The Simcha just held up to us. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. For my sake, the world is created. And what does it say on the back there? Let's see the back. Eineni ela afar ve'efer. I am only, or it's in the positive sense, anochi, I am dirt and soil. Yeah, look at that. Y'all have that. Pretty cool.
We gave, for once I did it as the theme for Yamim Noraim, and everybody got one. From David Zaslow had them made up.
Yes. And the story is that Simcha Bunim of Shishcha said that you should have a piece of paper, two pieces of paper, not one coin, two pieces of paper, one in one pocket that says the world's created for my sake, and the other in the other pocket saying I'm just dirt and dust. And but you know, the trick is knowing which piece of paper to pull out at which moment. And in a way, what we have is a culture which pulls out the wrong piece of paper all the time, pretty much every single time. Yeah. But Bishvili nivra ha'olam sounds like the most anthropocentric thing you could possibly say. Except, if the world is created for my sake, how can you say the world is created for your sake? It's inherently contradictory, right? And this is why I say, like, yeah, you have plenty of anthropocentrism in the rabbinic tradition, but Simcha and everyone, it's not a coherent, radical philosophy, right? It's like, if everyone's supposed to say, for my sake, the world is created, obviously, it's a contradiction that can't be true for everyone in the same way, and yet the rabbis tell us that everyone should say that. So they understand that that's contradictory.
See if you
They
can
understand that that's a psychological move as opposed to a metaphysical truth. That's the difference. Gil?
Sorry to interrupt, David. Yeah, trying to find me a coin with one side.
Yeah, and?
No, it's just that
a Mobius coin.
Yeah, Mobius coin, you have to have both sides of the coin, and that's the instruction about which do you take out when. If it's Simcha Bonhams, it's that when you're feeling insignificant, you take on the one that says the world is created for my sake. When you're feeling haughty, you take out the one that says I am but dust and dirt.
Exactly.
But wasn't I am but dust and ashes from Moshe arguing with God with great chutzpah to say don't destroy?
Abraham arguing, but yes.
Abraham. What did I say? Moshe. I meant Abraham. I was picturing Abraham in my mind. But right, to like stop the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is also an interesting.
And the formulation is different too. It's Eineni ela afar ve'ever. I am nothing except dirt and dust, but I still take upon myself to speak to the God of all gods, the King of Kings. I'm not sure what the lashon is in the Torah at that point. So yeah, that's what that is. But what's interesting is that you can take that statement and understand how it's self-contradictory, and understand how it is psychological and not metaphysical. And then it becomes an empowering statement and a meaningful, valuable thing to have in your repertoire, right? It's just maybe even an essential thing to have in your repertoire. Or you can take it and build a metaphysics on it and destroy the world, basically. And that's what we're doing. So there's no such thing as rabbinic metaphysics in that way. The rabbis didn't do coherent, consistent metaphysics. That wasn't how they did thinking. They did it by having contradictory statements that couldn't be reconciled with each other, both being affirmed as true.
Very sad.
You have a complex reality. That's what they did. And that's in a way what in a way the loss with the taking over of rabbinic thought by Hellenism is not not only the specific ideas, but the general idea that you have to have coherence and consistency in order to be thinking a true thought. Make sense? So once we let go of that, it's not a problem to say Ze Sefer Toldot Adam Ze Klal Gadol b'Torah. That's not a problem to say that, because it is a great principle. We do learn great things from it. It is extraordinarily important for people to have the capacity to say, for my sake, the world is created. Because we have mountains and we have valleys, and humans are complicated and difficult, and we need that kind of buttressing in order to make it sometimes just through the morning. Right? I know I do. But then you have someone like Rabbi Nachman, who takes a statement like that. This is also part of chapter 3, right? And says, if the world is created for my sake, then I better pray for and fix the world in every moment. So, and this is something that I like to point out, and I have pointed out in the past. When you have someone take a statement and interpret it so it means almost exactly the opposite of what it sounds like it means, then you can bet that teaching is exceedingly important to that person, because they wanted to neutralize the idea and the tradition that said the opposite of what they believe in. So that's what Rabbi Nachman is doing with this, right? He's taking the statement, for my sake the world is created, and he's turning it on its head. Or the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, which says, Tov me'od me'od ze Adam. So the verse is, God saw everything that God had made, and behold, it's very good. Hine tov me'od, v'hine tov me'od. So what's the me'od? The Torah doesn't tell you what makes it very good. So for Rambam, Maimonides, what makes it very good is the whole being one living organic being. That's so important that no individuals of the human species or any other species are worth anything at all in comparison with the whole of creation that exists and endures. That's a quote, more or less, and we've gone over that quote before. That's what the ma'od means. But for this particular midrash, the ma'od, it says ma'od ze Adam. So remember, ma'od and Adam have the same letters, mem, aleph, dalet, mem. So they're saying the thing that makes creation very good is humanity. Couldn't be a more anthropocentric statement, really. It's not necessarily the worst, because it doesn't tell you what to do with that high status. It doesn't tell you to go out and destroy things, or that you have the right to. But it still gives humans incredible status in this creation. But then you have Shnei Luchot Abrit, Isaiah Horowitz, coming and saying that what this means is that the human being is created last, so that the human can include in itself the image of all the other creatures and beings and the whole of creation in it. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them, the Adam Ma'od, very good, because the Adam is the one that has the image of the whole of creation, and thereby unifies the creation itself by its being created. And so again, in that case, the highest value is not the human being, but creation itself. And the human being has high value in reference to the high value of creation. And so that's, again, turning that statement upside down. Yeah. You had a sort of hand up, raised up, Gil. Did you mean to?
I think Deborah did first, and I do, but
Okay.
okay.
So I'm not sure when Perek Shirah dates to, it used to be part of the Siddur, and it's the biblical verses that have the songs of all the animals.
Yeah, I don't know when it dates to, actually, but
yeah,
go on.
But so the story with that is that every animal has its own song, or every aspect of creation has its own song, except the human, who is made up of the songs of all the other beings. And the only way a human gets their own song is if they are able to unite their whole generation. So like there's, the song of Deborah.
That's a beautiful idea, but where is that in Perek Shirah? I don't think that's in Perek Shirah.
It's the midrash that goes along with Perek Shirah. It's the kind of background, the story of how. Let me see if I can find the reference to it. I have several versions.
Which is valuable, says that David came along finishing up the Psalms, all proud of himself and walking down the road, And the frog says, I have more songs than you have.
Yeah.
Put him in his
Well, in this midrash, the only people who get a song like the Song of Deborah or the Song of Miriam or the Song of Moses are people who can unite their whole generation in some kind of amazing world-altering action.
That's really cool. I would love to see that.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. It's here on my shelf somewhere.
But the Perek Shira in general raises some good points, because you have this text which in a midrashic or poetic way ascribes language to all of creation, including clouds, not just frogs and such, right? And the clouds sing this line of Psalms, but all they have to say is a line from the Psalms that a human wrote, right? They don't have anything to say that isn't a human statement that a human wrote. So that's kind of, I don't find that to be very empowering to a biocentric viewpoint at all. Quite the opposite. It reduces everything to human culture.
And like say those earliest parts of the Vedas that are perhaps in the sound of what we heard in the more than human world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the preamble to it, which talks about David being so proud and the frog showing him up, that has a lot more value to me than the actual Perek Shira when I look at it. On the other hand, it's a very beloved text. So, if it makes people feel close to nature, then that's good. But if they can't see the problem with it, and that might be a problem also.
I'm struck by this thing of that there's individual humans, but with animals or plants, we're talking about entire species.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just in our tradition, and this is also in all kinds of esoteric things. I remember this at Findhorn as well.
Mm-hmm.
That Dorothy McLean was speaking with the angels of the species of the plants.
Yep.
And it's this curious thing that I, as an individual, have this kind of consciousness that in other layers of creation, it's not as detailed, or my imagination of it, how it happens in them, is not as detailed.
No, I think you're right about that for sure. Let me say one thing, Gil, and then I'll call on you if that's okay with you. The whole concept of olam maleh, that a person is an olam maleh, a full world. One reading of that, which I think is actually a very good reading of that, is that other species are an olam maleh. Every species is an olam maleh, but only humans is each individual an olam maleh. Right?
How do we know?
Excellent question.
Where's that from?
I'm talking about what I think the Midrash means, but as opposed to do we know that, or how do we know that? Who has a clue? Okay, sorry, Gil, go on.
Oh, what Midrash is that from? That last?
That's in the book in chapter 3. It's towards the end.
Okay.
It's an interpretation. The Olam Maleh, of course, is Mishnah, but it's an interpretation of the Mishnah given by Len Goodman, who's a modern day scholar.
Okay, very
but
good.
I think it's a very good reading of the text.
I like it a lot.
Shot close to shot.
Three things, if I can remember them all. To what Simcha was just saying, and what you were saying about Perek Shira. The Psalms that are recorded in Perek Shira is what the human heard. It's not what the frog said. The frog said what the frog said. The human heard in the context of human and put down words that the human could put down. So I'm not as upset about it as you are if we take that kind of more Findhornian midrash on it.
I want to edit the midrash and rewrite it a little bit to make that clear.
Yeah, I think that would be worth doing. Second, on Ma'od is Adam.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in the text, there isn't Adam, there's Ha-Adam. Right? There's
Right.
the earthling, undifferentiated, unnamed.
Right.
But back to the other about the, this goes back to Tselem and what you were talking about from Shnei Luchot. I've heard of similar version from Rabbi Gershon Winkler, who posits then when Elohim says Na'aseh Adam b'Tzelmeno, kiduteno, it's, the rabbis talk about this as the royal we. Who is the Na'aseh to? And the angels haven't been brought into the story yet. And what Reb Gershon says, the only possible recipient of that statement is the entirety of creation created up to that point.
Right. So now that's in chapter 9, by the way.
And so let us make the earthling in our image. The our is all of creation, which exactly supports, I think, what you were saying.
Yeah, and I'm going to put up a little text for you all to savor, which we will again get to later on, but I'm going to do it right now because it's great text. So Gershon Winkler says stuff. He says a lot of stuff about what Judaism says, and sometimes it's really from his own heart,
Yeah.
but not really from the text. Sometimes sometimes he's reading the text in a way that can be very tendentious. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of what rabbis do.
Yeah.
But it's what I try not to do personally. But there are other texts that say this. So here, footnote 819. Look at this one. This is from Aderet Eliyahu, which is the Vilna Gaon. No slouch, right? Rather important in Orthodox Judaism and in all Judaism. Let us make Adam. Its explanation is that since Adam was created last of all creatures, therefore the Holy One said to all the creatures that they should give a portion from their character to the body of the human. For might is related to the lion, speed to the deer, agility to the eagle, cleverness to the fox. And this is the meaning of in our image, that the form of every species became united in the human species, right? So that's kind of astonishing that you find that in what is really the most orthodox of Orthodox teachers, yeah? But now look at what comes after that. This part here. See that at the end of the footnote. The form of every species became united in the human species. Why? Why was that important? So in Kabbalah, in the majority kind of perspective in Kabbalah, it's so that creation itself can be brought together as a single tent, as a mishkan, actually, is the phraseology that's alluded to in pre-Eitz Hadar, right? But for Vilna Gaon, it says, in order that they would all of them be conquered under his hand. The silent, growing, moving, and speaking. Remember, that means rock, vegetable, animal, and human. There's a little contradiction there anyway, because he says that the human would be conquered by the human. Who knows what that means? So that he would dominate over all. And he placed in him a portion of God from above so that he would serve Hashem. Right? So it's a beautiful idea, and it requires more context and more thought in order to make it something that will take us in the direction that we want to go to. Basically what I wanted to point out. We should finish chapter 5, if it's okay to shift from there.
Thank you.
You okay with that?
So thank you.
But these are all good points. So I think what's important to notice here is that any idea can be used for ill and for good. So the infinite value of the human, it's a great idea that does great good when we're thinking about human rights. It's so essential. And that is why Yitzhak Greenberg emphasized it so much. And there were some other theologians of his time reacting to the Holocaust in the Protestant world that said exactly the same thing for the same reasons, right? And yet it has consequences. It has side effects that maybe not what are intended. The same thing with the Perek Shirah has this part that's so good and this part that has a side effect. Same thing with anything that I'm teaching also. You know, and people can take ecology and turn it into anti-humanism. And that does happen. And we do need to be exceedingly guarding against that. Rita, you had your hand on. I do want to move to chapter 5, but what did you want to say? Can't hear you. Turn on your mic. Turn on your mic, maybe turn off your screen.
Yeah, sorry. I've had this idea that be imitatio Dei, being in the Thelem of God, was if there's a creator that in every moment is paying attention to the needs of all 7+ billion of us, plus all the animals and the plants and every blade of grass, then
and every bacteria,
to try to act in the image of God is to be, yeah. But it's to be as aware as we can in every moment. That's
yeah, and that's a good reasonable interpretation. And there's lots of things that fit together in that kind of interpretation. Like for Maimonides, it means apprehending the intricate, beautiful nature and nature of the way everything interacts to create a whole, which is understanding how God governs the world. But he says, if you understand that, then a person who understands that level of how creation works will automatically be motivated to act with loving kindness and righteousness and justice. Every action they take will be for the sake of kindness, love, and justice. So that's a big leap. It's an interesting thing to think about. What does it mean to imagine that as soon as you understand the intricacy of how the world works, you would automatically be moved toward justice and love? Because that doesn't seem to be the way it works for people who are hyper into technology and really don't care about what the consequence is, right? And yet for Maimonides, you couldn't possibly have that level of understanding of the universe without being motivated toward love. Yeah.
Yeah, so back to what I was saying about integrating previous levels of consciousness, one of the things that interferes with it is trauma. And there is, all peoples have all kinds of historical trauma, most peoples anyway. And Thomas Berry describes the results of that as a form of kind of, he calls it like a learned autism, that we become autistic to all the things around us and our relationship with them, that we're too cut off and focused in.
I can't
because
say
of that.
About autism to know if that's a good metaphor, but I think I understand.
Well, he uses that word as a kind of inner focus that has a hard time taking in the
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so moving to chapter 5, we're on page, we have like 158, page 158 through 170 to look at. So just quickly, I'm going to go over things a little bit quickly. The first section, dominion, raises some questions about what dominion really means and emphasizes that in the Midrash, dominion is according to some interpretations, the opposite of what Noah has after the flood, which is fear and dread. So dominion is something that calls the creatures to us. But what we have now, the kind of thing that we think of as dominion, is actually something that drives the creatures away from us. So that's not dominion. So that's one thing to think about. And also to point out that for Maimonides, I think we talked about this already, dominion is not an imperative about what we should do. It's just a description of the fact that we have that power, not that we should use it. So that's important, that there, in other words, there are minority voices in the tradition about what dominion means, which are much more useful for an ecocentric perspective. The overall perspective in the tradition is much closer to dominion, meaning domination and using things. And that's just the truth, that it is more like that. Secondly, the question of intrinsic value. If humans have infinite value, is that the same thing as saying that humans only have intrinsic value? Or only humans can be ends in themselves and everything else has use value as opposed to a value as an end in itself? So it seems to me that for the rabbis, giving humans tremendous value was not equivalent to giving everything else only use value, that everything has intrinsic value in a rabbinic worldview. And there's kind of an acknowledgement of the contradictoriness of that reality, that it's impossible to treat everything as an end all the time, as an end in itself. And yet everything from a godly perspective, from a divine perspective, is an end in itself. And that's, of course, what Maimonides says when he says that that's what it means to say that God saw what God had made and it is good. Its goodness is an indication that it has intrinsic value as an end in itself and not just value for us in terms of its use. Then the last part of this chapter talks about other dimensions of creation having standing. So it's easy to say that animals have some kind of moral standing because animals can be seen as subjects in a very clear way. And of course, it depends on the intelligence of the animal and the emotional, development of the animal. There's all kinds of things about different species that might give us a reason to attribute more or less consciousness or more or less subjectivity to them. But it's easy in general to see animals as having subjectivity. But what about plants? What about rocks? What about the land? And what we can say for sure is that there are many traditions within Judaism that say that everything has a soul, that including a rock, that everything has a subjectivity, that everything requires respect and demands respect from us. And of course, most importantly, and this is something we started with at the beginning, the land itself is clearly a subject that has rights that has intrinsic value. It has value that outweighs value of human beings, which is so different than saying that humans have infinite value, right? So humans have a great value, and individual humans have a greater value than any other individual of any other species. But even whole groups of humans don't have greater value than the land itself, according to our tradition. So that brings us up to the end of chapter 5. I'm going to just read the last lines. We have seen that the moral universe includes the more than human world. That is, it's not that morality is only between human beings. Morality is between humans and all beings. Even what we think of as inanimate has a moral dimension to it, right? Adding to this, the rights of the land challenges us to develop an ethics that goes far beyond the limited reality of anthropocentrism. So that's simply true about Judaism. There's no two sides about that. There's no question that the rabbinic moral universe includes more than human beings. It's not a debatable point. It's not a matter of interpretation. It's a fact. The question is, what do we do with that fact, and how strongly do we want to extend that into our own moral universe? So then 169 to 71 is the intermediate conclusions that I came to after. So this is finishing part 1 for us now. Did anyone want to say any words about that? Or want to bring anything up about it?
It's just a lovely summary. I enjoyed it so much.
Oh, good, and thank you. The most important thing that I emphasize in that intermediate conclusion is that the rabbis have a holistic anthropology. It's not just that this is what makes us most human, or this is what makes us most human. It's not just that what makes us human is what divides us from the animals. Sometimes what makes us most human is what connects us to the other animals, or to the other beings, or the other creatures, or to life in general. And I end with
something else.
What's that?
The other thing that's interesting is you were just saying how when somebody uses a pasuk and then reinterprets it to mean almost what sounds like it's opposite, that it's really important. And you kind of did that in this conclusion, right? You said that the rabbis who were becoming much more anthropocentric, then that was reinterpreted to lay the groundwork for a much more holistic and that laid the groundwork for Kabbalah. Didn't you say that?
Right. Yes. The important thing is that the rabbis had an anthropology and a worldview that it was anthropocentric, but it wasn't radically so. It didn't reject myth. It didn't reject the idea of other things being ensouled besides human beings. It had a very complex and rich and diverse way of looking at the world. Jewish philosophy comes along with Sa'adya Gaon and everything after that, with the exception of Maimonides, and just shuts it all down. And even Maimonides shut it down in some ways because he denigrated the idea of imagination very strongly. So he had his own limitations, even though he's the best and I love him so much, right? But Kabbalah comes in reaction to Jewish philosophy and reclaims everything that was being repressed and brings it back into and heightens it and really expands it way beyond what the rabbis were doing already. So the philosophy, the repression of philosophy creates the groundwork for Judaism to kind of have an explosion of metaphysical, wildness, which is Kabbalah. And without that, rabbinic Judaism would still be able to give us an eco-theology, but it wouldn't be half as fun as what we can get out of Kabbalah. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much the things I wanted to talk about today. Does anyone want to bring up any other issues or questions?
Yesher koach.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you.
I just, when I learned that Native Americans consider the rocks their grandmothers and grandfathers, it was at a ceremony that was it was at a funeral, and I was with the people, and it was just so life-giving. It like increased my family. It made family bigger. It just expanded so much. So that once I was introduced to that by someone who really believed it and held that as a belief, it just changed my whole relationship to rocks, and it makes it so much more. There's so much. The world is richer if we would listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't know how much contact. I mean, it was a long time ago, and I don't have that much contact with indigenous.
We are indigenous too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Although in a complicated way that is rather perverse nowadays. But in theory, anyway,
We were.
potential to connect to our own actual indigenous roots. Like if we can somehow maneuver around the theft of land in West Bank and things like that people claim in the name of being indigenous. If we can somehow maneuver around that to get to what it actually means, then we have some great foundations to work with.
Except that the Torah itself, the shot of the Mikra, says very clearly that, in fact, you were speaking about this earlier, that the land expelled its previous inhabitants because of their immorality, and that we should watch out because we're going to read this in Shul on Shabbat. We should watch out because the land will, if we go there, we'll be in trouble too.
We were already going there, just for the record.
You think?
Stealing land from people is going there.
You think?
Burning down people's houses because because you think they don't belong there is going there. Everything that the settlers do to tearing up an olive tree is going there. And if our covenant has any value, if there's any truth to it, then we are living in a way that will cause us to be vomited out of the land. We're living in a way which necessarily brings exile. If it doesn't bring exile, it means we don't actually have a covenant and it's all bullshit. Pardon my language, right? Because that's what it says. The covenant says the reason why you have the right to go back is because you have the necessity of getting expelled if you screw it up. And if we don't get expelled, it means that that covenant wasn't real. So that's a problem.
And thinking not as particularly to that piece of land, which is holy and sacred, but looking at the entire earth, we certainly have already gone there.
Yes, we have. On that very happy.
And we're in the process of being vomited out.
Let's imagine that it's not too late for Israel, for Palestine, for Canaan, and for the entire world, and that we will find a place. See, the promising aspect of the idea of exile is that there's some place to get exiled to.
Oh my God.
Right? And then you can come back after you had your time out. But we're living in a world where we're not having any place to get exiled to, because we're doing this to every place.
Yeah.
So this is the scariest part about all of this, really, in so many ways. But we're doing this learning, and it matters. And we're trying to understand the earth, and it matters. And we're fighting the ways that we can fight, and it matters. And it matters to win, but it matters even if we don't think about whether we're winning or not. It still matters, because it still matters to be in right relationship to the world around us, even if it's for just another second. Yeah.
Somehow the process of doing my dissertation led me to this like amazing sort of visceral imagery experience of the universe being the Mishkan and the planet being the, what do they call it? Mishkan Ma'at? No, Mikdash Ma'at, the small version, the sort of the archetypal, you have the big Mikdash and the Mikdash Ma'at. And, that the whole world is the temple.
Yes. That's the prayer of Priyetz Hadar. It says that Priyetz Hadar is the first Tu B'Shvat Seder in the 1700s, which says something like, you created everything below in the image of what is above, so that the whole of creation could be united so that it could become a single unity, liot echad, which is the language that's used for the Mishkan. When they put it all together, it says everything became one, right? So that's that's the phrase used by the Pri Yetzirah, and that's why we can learn about the divine mysteries by studying the trees and the plants. And then that's why we celebrate them on Tu B'Shvat, because they teach us the divine mysteries, and through that means enable us to participate in the unification of creation so that it becomes a single Mishkan, a sanctuary.
Can you hear it soon?
Yes. So just a moment of reflection on the class. Oh, go on, Simcha. I just want to say.
I was just saying halavai.
Oh, okay. This is our, which class? 5th class or 6th class? Does anyone know?
No idea.
It's the 5th one that I joined. I don't know if I joined. I didn't join from the beginning though, so it must be 6, 7.
I'm thinking we're going to probably go to 15 classes in order to go through the book, which means we're maybe a little over a third of the way through. Because I think that's how long it will take us to even on a superficial level get through the whole book. So I just want to let you know that that's my plan, is to go for 15 classes.
Awesome.
And I'll say one more thing, which is I am offering people, if you want to organize that, I'm doing Zoom study with people's communities over Shavuot. If you have a community you want me to do that with, I'm interested in lining up an evening or a night's worth of times to study, and we can combine groups from different places if that works out. Yeah, so if you want to make something of that happen with me, I would be happy to do that. And also there's huge resources on Neo Chassid for you organizing your own studies, and you can take stuff from the book, of course, and do things with that as well if you want to. If I can help you, I will help you. Figure out how to do that on your own if you want to, or I can help you by helping you by actually doing it with you. And I mean, happy Lag BaOmer.
That we don't relate to.
Right.
Do you do Zoom on Yontiv or only on a weekday?
I don't necessarily, but I'm going to for Shavuot because I think Torah study is more important.
And secondly, I don't think you've mentioned giving people donating, but
Oh, yes.
so how should you do that? Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of contributing for the class, I was thinking something like $5 to $20 for a session without anyone feeling like they have to pay anything at all if they don't want to, if they can't, okay? So you can, I'm not gonna, Julie was gonna organize Venmo. Do you wanna do that still, Julie, or do you not wanna do that?
I don't feel I can take on organizing something else, but can people donate through Neo Chassid to you, or do you have?
Let me see if there's a better way to organize it. Right now, if you, there's a donate page that you get to through the Omer Counter app, which you can donate through. But maybe I should get my tush together and do something like set up a Venmo account or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can do that for next week. There's no rush on this.
Great.
And
yeah, I had emailed you about that, but I hadn't heard back.
Yeah, that's why, because I like to avoid these things because I feel shy and strange about them.
Oh, but this is a tremendous gift, and it would be a machaya for us to be able to support it in the right way.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Really, thank you.
I will call you about Shavuot because my
Okay.
temple's doing 10 minutes on Zoom. We have 10-minute segments.
Okay.
Yeah, I can imagine you going to many different temples and just making a calendar, and because you have a lot of hours and you don't have to travel.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
See, it lets you be like Elijah visiting all the Seder.
I'll have to sign us
Not
off because I
good.
have to do another meeting, believe it or not, in a few minutes.
Okay, everybody.
Good to see everybody.
Bye, good to see you all. See you next week.
Take care, everyone.